Welcome to Parenting Adventures. We help parents empower their kids to build a growth mindset so they can tackle any size challenge that school and life can throw at them. From grades to bullying and struggles at home and school, and everything in between. Whether you're in the elementary alphabet stage or navigating high school credits, we're diving into how you can relate and influence positive action. Stick around for real solutions, expert tips, and stories that resonate and inspire. Ready for personalized mindful tutoring? Head to tutorteach.ca/tutoring to see how our 9 cornerstones to success have helped over 3,000 students achieve their goals. Now, let's dig into the episode.
Have you ever worried that your child's speech development might be falling behind or they aren't reaching typical speech milestones? I'm your host, Lara, and today we're thrilled to have Kathy Simon with us. Kathy is a registered speech language pathologist and founder of Simon Says Speech and Alberta Therapy Co. based in Edmonton, Alberta. Kathy's journey into speech language pathology began at Western University and took her to Northern Ontario, where she worked with diverse communities, including remote Indigenous populations. This experience shaped her family-centered approach to therapy. In 2020, Kathy founded Simon Says Speech, which has grown into the multidisciplinary Alberta Therapy Co., offering a range of therapeutic services for families. In this episode, we chat with Kathy about speech milestones, warning signs of speech delays, practical strategies parents can use at home, and so much more. You won't want to miss it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kathy. We're so excited to chat with you. Before we dive into all my questions for you, would you mind giving our audience some background on yourself, what led you to speech language pathology, and what you do right now with Simon Says and Alberta Therapy Co.?
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I'm really, really excited, and it's my first podcast. So a little bit about myself. I grew up in a little town in Newfoundland. It only had 1,100 people, and I really became interested in communication very early on. They called me Chatty Cathy for a reason, and my parents, always made really strong connections wherever they went. And so when I decided to be a speech language pathologist, it was early in my high school years, and I went through St. Thomas University for my undergrad degree. It was in psychology and gerontology, and then I went to Western University for my master's degree in speech language pathology. So when I graduated, I actually traveled to the far north in Ontario. I worked there for a few years, and then I made my way here to Edmonton, Alberta, where I worked in a school board as part of their early learning team, but also their AAC team, which is alternative and augmentative communication. So once I was done at the school board, I decided I wanted to be in private practice, and that's where I am now. So I am the owner of Simon Says Speech and also Alberta Therapy Co., which is our multidisciplinary clinic where we have psychologists, behavioral consultants, dietitian, physiotherapist, and speech language pathologists, occupational therapists. If you're looking for a service for your family, that's where you would come to find them, and we can help you navigate your way through that.
That's an amazing story. And I'm indebted to speech language pathology because I had to see one when I was a child. I could not say my R's, and Lara has an R in it. So I was so embarrassed about saying my name that I would just tell people a random name. I'd be like, yeah, my name's like, my middle name's Michelle. I'd say my name's Michelle. And my parents were like, you need to stop doing that. And I was embarrassed, I couldn't say my R's. And so the trade really turned it around for me. And now I can say my R's, thankfully. So
it's the trickiest sound ever. Even as a speech pathologist to work on R, there are so many components to it that it makes it so challenging for kids. So that's a very common error. And when we may get into that, I also saw a speech language pathologist when I was in the 8th grade. I really liked singing and talking on the phone, again, because I was Chatty Cathy, and I got nodules on my vocal folds. And so I had to go to a speech pathologist to learn how to, ease and relax my voice and also not abuse my voice. So that's where it all pretty much started for me too.
Wow, and I didn't even realize that that's what speech pathology worked on, was functions like that. And I also love that your name is Kathy and that they called you Chatty Cathy, because that's just perfect.
Maybe I didn't love it back then, but it's fine now. I'm like, this is part of my journey. So definitely it took shape. I think after I went to that speech pathologist, I didn't know what speech pathology was either. And now, when I have to explain it to someone, like, where do we work? We work with adults who have had strokes. We work with swallowing patients. We work with children who have stuttering, speech sounds, language delays or disorders, apraxia of speech. There's so many, and voice quality, and voice control. So speech language pathologists can have a really diverse caseload, but also you want to find someone who has the education, the extra professional development, and that niche in that area, so they really know how to help in the area that you're looking for.
It's safe to say that your job is probably not super monotonous then because it covers such a huge spectrum of needs.
For sure.
So let's start by talking about some of the key speech and language milestones in children, say ages 4 and up. What are some typical milestones that parents can anticipate?
hmm I think it's really important when we're talking, because the umbrella of everything that we cover is so broad. I guess for the sake of our discussion, I'll talk about speech and language. And sometimes we'll have parents call and they'll be wondering about their child's speech, or they'll just use speech as the general term. But really, when we're talking about speech, it's the speech sounds that the child's making. So, how clear are they? And then when we talk about language, so expressive language being the words that they use, and then their receptive language is the words that they understand. So when we talk about language, it's all about the words and the vocabulary, and then also when we talk about speech, it's speech sounds. There are other areas like social communication that kind of go hand in hand with all of these things. So for a 4-year-old, I'd say if we start around 4 and we kind of work our way up, we want the skills to develop as they age. So for a 4-year-old, if we're looking at speech sounds, we would want them to be somewhere between 75% and 90% intelligible. So when we say intelligible, we mean able to be understood by others. If you're noticing that your child is less than that, or maybe people outside of your family are having difficulty understanding them, there may be some speech sound errors that need some speech therapy. When you're looking at language, there are many different little areas for a 4-year-old as they're growing into kindergarten. I would say for the most part, we want them to be able to string words together. So 3 to 4 to 5 word sentences at the minimum. We want them to have a really nice vocabulary, and they have lots of categorical vocabulary, lots of core vocabulary. They can say, like, I see a big train, for example. So we want them to be able to say and string together sentences. Maybe even be able to tell you about their day, what happened at daycare or what happened at preschool, and be able to be understood in that story. You might have to ask some probing questions. But also they should be able to understand those questions, like, what did you do today? Who did you see? Where did you go? We want them to have an understanding of those WH questions so they can answer them. So that's really like the 4-year-old milestones that I can think of that are really, really important. Um, I know, and it kind of goes along with like literacy and language, but also being able to mark like past tense, make plural nouns, make possessive nouns, like that's mommy's truck or that's daddy's car. So being able to mark those grammatical structures are also very important as they're developing language. So we will start noticing that more and more. You may notice it with your 3-year-old, but really at 3 to 4, we're really developing all these like main language skills, and it just grows from there.
What about contractions? Like my son, he won't say don't, won't. He'll say will not, do not. Is that a developmental thing or is that just a preference in speech?
Yeah, so there's something called MLU, and it's calculated for every age and kind of stage. So, like at 2, they should have a certain MLU, and that just means the mean or the average length of their utterance. And so, when we're looking at like a 4-year-old, for example, they should have a mean length of utterance between 3 and 3/4. So, that would be like almost 4 words in their sentence, or structures up to about 4.5. So, that counts them marking grammatical tenses as well. So if I'm looking at a child and they say, me go downstairs, or something like that, I would be looking to see if they're marking plurals, did they use a pronoun correctly? So we're counting those, and that all kind of goes along with their mean length of utterance. And so, how many grammatical tenses are you using, and how grammatically correct is that sentence that you're producing? So it's a tedious process. We're always looking at like the milestone or the average for those children in their age group, trying to compare them best to their peers. But also we have to consider so many other things when we're assessing, because children may have 2 languages at home, they may have 3 languages at home. Which one's the dominant one? How often are they hearing that at home? So, there are so many little components of, is this a language delay or disorder, that makes it really challenging if there are all these other little things that are contributing to that. So yeah, so I often practice, I would say, on the average, not the milestone. If you visit your pediatrician, it is more so the milestone, and that's about 25% of kids can do that skill at that age. We want our children to be average or above average if we're really shooting high, right? So I want kids to be at the 50% mark for their age. And so that might mean that if you're going to your pediatrician at 2 years old and they're saying, yeah, at 2 years old, 50 words is the milestone. For me, I would like them to have anywhere between 50 and 300 words. And a child who is saying 300 words at 2 has a lot more opportunity to pair words together, to describe, to have prepositions. So we want them to be at that 50% mark, which is about 200 to 300 words at that age. And it really just grows from there. So I think I caution parents sometimes to, we're not going to judge against our friends' children, but we also and acknowledge that they're all like little cars on the road. They're all going at different speeds, and that's okay. We want them to be at the same place by the time they reach school age, but also to recognize when their child may need the support, if they're maybe needing some early intervention to help them catch up to their same age peers.
That makes sense. And did you notice, in your professional opinion, any type of shift in the need for speech therapy after the pandemic or as a cause of the pandemic?
I get this question a lot, and in my own observations, honestly, I don't think that there was any shift. I just think that parents were not getting the support they needed in that time. So their child may have already had a language delay or a speech delay, but they weren't able to access the supports. People were nervous to go places. They maybe were like, "Oh, we're staying in. We're not going to get that assessment done." So I think what's happening is that I'm just seeing some of these children now for the first time, whereas pre-pandemic I would have seen them sooner, I think. Yeah, maybe there were more screen time opportunities, but a lot of times they might have been getting more rich language exposures from their parents if they were home more often with them. So you would hope that that quality time actually enhanced language skills, but I think it's just the more so that we missed some of the identification of those children in that time.
Right, right. Yeah, and that makes sense. And the pandemic hit everyone so differently. It may not always be obvious to parents, especially at such a young age. So, can you give us some common warning signs or red flags that might indicate a child may be experiencing speech delays or problems?
Mhm. I always start with this because a parent's gut feeling is usually right. You know, Maybe you did see a child on the playground and they are chatting up a storm and your child is not yet saying their first words, for example. You get that feeling that there might be something, right? My caution is usually to not wait, because if we wait and see, we might be missing like really important times where we can be doing early intervention. Sometimes I can give 4 sessions of early intervention strategies that the parent can go home and practice, and then they don't even need to come back. They've done it. The child starts, communicating more, and we have an in. So I would say, like, really go with your gut. If you're noticing that your child's maybe their speech sounds are not clear, they're nearing 3, you're still not really understanding what they're saying. Maybe they haven't said their first words by 3. We really would love them to have their first words by 12 months of age. So I'm really even aiming high by saying 3. Um, Usually around 2 is when parents start noticing there's a difference. So whether that be that they haven't said their first words yet, they're not very clear, maybe they're get in kindergarten and they're not maybe even recognizing letter sounds to like the letters. So there's going to be something, and you may have a professional along the way, a school teacher, preschool teacher who may bring that up, but really just following their opinions and following your gut, and then seeking out the professional that you might need.
Yeah, at Tutor Teach, I always tell parents, follow your gut, and the only person who's going to advocate for your kids is you. And so everyone might love your children, but no one's a better advocate for them than the parents at a young age anyways. And then you teach them to advocate for themselves as they get older. And so I completely agree with that. And also I never think it's a bad move to just go get things checked out, even if your gut wasn't 100% right, that you go get it checked out and give yourself peace of mind. Even if that's just what the appointment does, that's worth its weight in gold.
I absolutely love that. I agree 100%. I would rather tell a parent that I have 0 concerns about their child than to see them at 5 years old and maybe they're not speaking and we have more concerns that we have to bring up, and it's harder then. It's more difficult for me as a clinician because I feel bad too. Like I don't want to have to give news that maybe they weren't expecting. So yeah, definitely getting it checked is never a problem, and it should be something that can help inform them.
If you have a child come through, like for example, my kids speak French and English, and maybe they have one stronger language than the other, would they need to go see a specific speech therapist for each language? If there was issues with French, would they have to see a French speech therapist, for example?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question too, because French and English, usually you can find a French speaking speech language pathologist, although they are still very hard to come by. If you speak a different language like Punjabi, for example, that's even harder to find a speech pathologist who practices in Punjabi as well. So I would say, like, for me, I only speak English. I can assess children who speak French and English, but I do have to rely on their parent to be my guide on the French side of things if parent speaks French, whether they're translating my materials for me, they're relaying back to me what the child said in French. So I can make the best decision possible and clinical decision possible on whether this is child is learning English for the first time, for example. Are they bilingual exposure, or do we have a delay or disorder that's happening in both languages? So there is lots of little assessment pieces that go along with that. If I and in the past we have had to hire translators to come in and speak because the parents' English is not quite strong enough to be able to translate, and that has helped tremendously with a translator coming in and saying, "No, the child's telling me all about their day today. Sounds really great." To me, that's okay. I'm like, okay, perfect. We are speaking our home language accurately, and English is still in the process. But if a translator said to me, I'm hearing the same errors or I'm hearing speech sound errors and it's not clear, then I can see how that corresponds to their use of English too.
Interesting. Yeah, and learning two languages is enriching, but it can be frustrating if they're struggling on both ends at least. So,
Yeah, yeah, and it's trying to people have asked me and parents have asked me, "What's my recommendation? Should they go to French immersion if they have a language delay?" Like, we get into those conversations, and it is unique to every family, but if a child is exposed bilingually from an early age, then we expect them to develop the same skills, the exact same amount for both languages. So if it's 50-50, we want them to be developing that 50-50 as well. If we're noticing that they're not developing it as quickly, then there may be a language delay in both languages.
yeah, that makes sense. I learned French and English in tandem and at the same rate and pace. And so, but I could say my R's in French, but not in English, but they're very different.
Yeah.
So, how can parents know when it's time to take their child to see a speech pathologist? Are there specific indicators or concerns that directly warrant a visit? And do some problems work themselves out with age or practice, experience, things like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh boy. Okay.
These are heavy
Yes.
questions.
It is. That's a very hard question. The reason being, there are many levels to that question. And I would say I might even start from the end and go backwards because early intervention is research based and there is evidence to support that early intervention is key to developing the skills. If we were to leave a child, and this is, without intervention, it's not ethical to measure that population. So we don't know, right? We don't know if they will just naturally get it in a year or two more, like longer. So we know that it's the best to get your intervention earlier, and to leave a child and see if they'll figure it out or it will come is not the best. I guess we have more chance of them not catching up to their same age peers, and then it's harder to catch up when they get into academic grades. And I mean, grade 1 is quite academic, even kindergarten. So, we want them to be at that level by the time they reach that age. And if we miss out on like really key opportunities in the early stages, then we might send them further behind. So it's hard to know if a child will make their way eventually, right? Some of the indicators, I mean, again, if they are feeling it in their gut that their child is not developing, whether that be with speech and language skills or fine motor skills, or they're not walking, you're going to want to get that checked, and your doctor may point that out earlier on, hopefully. Some doctors may say wait and see. So I want to empower parents to know that they can advocate for themselves. There are resources that they can go to, and maybe the doctor is saying to wait, and maybe you're feeling like you don't want to wait. You can book a speech and language assessment without a referral from a pediatrician, and you can get those answers for yourself.
I was actually going to ask, is a referral required? And like in so many different areas, you need that referral to get in, but you're saying with speech pathology, it's not needed.
Yep, for speech language pathology, private practice, you don't need a referral through AHS, so Alberta Health Services, you don't need a referral. There may be a wait list on either side. And then same thing for services like occupational therapy too. You don't need a referral from your pediatrician. So if you're noticing some fine motor, gross motor with occupational therapy or physiotherapy, that would be the same for them.
Good to know. So when parents do decide to bring their child in for speech therapy, what can they expect from that first visit? Is there a particular diagnosis or assessment process involved, or is it dependent on the child?
Definitely dependent on the child, on the family, maybe what they're noticing at home, and that would really navigate us through the assessment process. For younger children under 3, my assessment process is very much reliant on the parent being or the caregiver on their like question-based answers that I'm giving them. So I need to gather so much information from a caregiver at that point, and it does take up a lot of the appointment. But while I'm gathering that information about their child's use and understanding of language at home, I'm also watching, what is the child playing with that I've put out for them? What are they bringing to their parent to communicate that they want it open? I'm watching all the communication nuances that are happening along with asking questions to the parent. So there's a lot happening in the assessment. A lot of it is very play based. And a lot of it is really me seeing how the child's communicating at that point in time and how they're doing that with their preferred people, which would be their caregivers. Um, as we get a little older, we actually move into assessments that I can do directly one-on-one with the child. So for speech or for language, we have assessment processes that they can do lots of pointing. I'll be asking them questions that may involve speech sounds or grammatical tenses. And then I can score that along with their same age peers to give a comparison. As we move a little even older into like school aged, we're going to be still looking at expressive and receptive language, but a speech language pathologist can also assess literacy disorders. We are usually the people who would identify if there's maybe a possibility of dyslexia. However, we need further support from a psychologist to make the formal diagnosis. And so I'm doing a lots of literacy assessments too when they get in grade 2, 3, 4. They're not yet able to read or write. So we do lots of like reading comprehension, oral comprehension, spelling, phonics, like all of those things. So assessment can look very different across the ages and really depends on the child and what we're noticing and what we're hearing from the parents.
We have a lot of parents at Tutor Teach who say, "Do you think my child is dyslexic?" And it's not a yes or a no. They have to go through an assessment, an observation, and be tested for it essentially, and hit certain markers. And so there's a lot of concern about that. And I find that a lot of parents whose children are in the grade kindergarten and one, right away they're mixing their P's and Q's and their B's and D's, which is actually very common at that age. They immediately jump to, do you think my child has dyslexia? And so, there's a little bit of that balance of encouraging parents to advocate for their child, but also be patient. They're still little. They're learning a lot of new things, like you said, as early as kindergarten now. And so, yeah, just be patient with them too, and know that the signs will show themselves at some point too.
And you can, as a parent who has a child newly in school, you can really look to the teacher to see what they're seeing, see if it's the same in the classroom as it is at home. And in my experience, I feel like kids who tend to shy away from like reading activities, or they're not really interested in literacy activities, they don't really like reading books with you, even just partner assisted. Maybe they're doing that for a reason, because it's challenging, and kids don't want to do things that are challenging for them, so or make them stand out from their peers. So I think you would start getting an indication maybe like late kindergarten into grade one, when the academics start really ramping up and becoming more prominent, not just play-based learning anymore.
Right, and kids tell us so much more sometimes without telling us anything, and so just knowing your child and their level of enthusiasm typically is this, and yet with reading or with math, it might not be there. There might be a reason for that. So I've been told that one of the best ways to support your child's speech development, among many other benefits, is by reading to them. Is this accurate, and what are some other effective strategies or activities that parents can use at home to support and encourage their child's speech and language development?
Well, I'm a huge advocate of reading. I feel like you can start that at any age, whether they're 8 weeks old or 5 years old. Like, we really want to be reading all the time. And it helps with so many things: language development, speech sounds, letter recognition, phonological awareness. Like, reading is like really the key for so many things. I know for myself, when my little one was 3 months old, I was putting two books out in front of her while she was doing tummy time and saying, "Do you want the puppy book or the bunny book?" And then I'd put them out and I'd wait, and then I would maybe see if she's, like, reaching towards one, and then I would interpret that and I'd say, "Oh, you really want the puppy book." And so we just built on that over time, by giving her options and giving her choices even when she couldn't speak. And so we read books all the time, and when they're really little, it's nice to be as face to face as possible so they can really see your lips, they can see the words that you're making, what you're looking at on the page. So I read my books upside down for a long, long time, where I was doing this and reading to her this way. And I oftentimes, at that point between 3 months and two, I wasn't really reading the words on the page. I didn't read every single word that I could, because my focus was building the language around what's happening on the page, the interest in the books, my pacing, those types of things. So I wasn't really focused on reading every single word. And I think some parents feel scared because they're like, "Oh, I messed up that word," or, my child's lost. They've lost their focus. They don't want to read this whole book. It's too long. So if my book's too long and I'm losing my audience, which is my 2-year-old, then I shorten it up and I make something fun out of it, or I be like, "Wow, did you see the dinosaur? He stomped off our page." So really incorporating that as early as possible. Reading 3 books a day is the recommendation, and it can be the same 3 books. So I don't expect people to have a book collection of hundreds and thousands of books. I read the same 3 books quite often, and I would say every time we read that book, the exposure to that book gives her a new vocabulary word. We find something else, we see, maybe I didn't notice a butterfly flying in the sky. We're noticing things every single time, and now we're almost getting to the point where we can read repetitive books, and she's filling in my blanks. So we're up to about 2, and then when your child gets into preschool and kindergarten, now we're working on phonological awareness skills. Let's find all the things on this page that starts with P. Oh, pineapple. Wow, pineapple. Or sheep in a Jeep, for example. Oh, the sheep were in a Jeep. Did you hear two words that rhymed? Rhyming words sound the same at the end, right? Sheep, Jeep. So you're just really making it fun and engaging and more of a connection piece than really just like reading every word and making them follow along with their finger and being able to sound out the words. We want them to have an interest so they can have those literacy skills moving forward into like school.
Yeah, yeah, and even for me, I sometimes sing the books with my 3-year-old, so we'll sing together and he just thinks it's goofy and fun, but I think that it's important to start young too so that they create the love of reading and literacy, but also the habits. So I remember the first time my little guy turned the page himself, where I was like, "Okay, so now you physically know what to do with the book. It's not just sitting there and idly observing or listening to me reading to you, but now you've put your hand on the corner and you're anticipating turning the page." And so, as a parent, that is a milestone. It's so exciting.
It is a milestone. I think it's one of the OG milestones, to be honest. I feel like that is something that they look for is, are you turning the pages? But that is an interest in reading now. I want to see what happens next. And as they get older and into those like, 4 and 5 years old, you can start helping them make predictions. What do you think is going to happen next? Or where do you think that bunny is going? So we're building language in one activity, and you can do that in the morning, at night, you can do it throughout the day. It's just like such a wonderful, like there are so many strategies I can use just with a book.
And it keeps our brains as parents sharp because I think I've memorized almost every book I've read to those kids because I read them over and like I could recite Brown Bear to you right now. And so for us, it keeps us sharp, because we're
Yeah.
reading the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, and you might hear your child say something grammatically incorrect or speech sounds doesn't sound the same. They don't have to repeat it again, but you can always put it back out to them the right way. If they say brown bear, what you see, then you could say, "Oh, brown bear, what do you see?" And really emphasize what they missed, and then it's like just another model for them. I find myself stopping now and being like, "Oh, look at my mouth. Whoosh." Right? So, and she does, she'll stop and look. And so why not draw attention to the sounds that maybe they're not getting, even if it's developmentally appropriate, it's still an extra model for them. Just to help just expand on the clarity and their grammatical structures.
Navigating the process of finding help could be overwhelming for parents. Should they start by looking within the school system, or are there other resources they should consider first?
It's difficult for parents these days. I mean, where do you go? I'm noticing speech sounds. Do I ask my doctor first? Maybe your doctor tells you to wait. It's never bad to find out and ask your doctor, "Hey, can you give me the information for Alberta Health Services for speech language pathology?" You can also visit, there's a privately practicing website in Alberta, so ASAPP. You can find privately practicing speech language pathologists, and so parents can pay out of pocket, or parents can use their health insurance benefits in order to access that. So we have parents that sometimes they go to Alberta Health Services and they also see us here. Um, the school system, it really is dependent on the school that you're attending, your school district. You could ask your teacher, "I'm noticing this. Are you noticing this? What types of supports can you offer us here at school?" And finding that out, because it does change year to year, based on the decisions being made and if there's a speech language pathologist in their district. So yeah, I wouldn't say like rely on having like individual speech therapy at school. I feel like it's more broad based. It's very consultative toward the teacher. And then anything individual, you would be looking at Alberta Health Services or private practice.
Yeah, and there's been a change in resources that are available to the schools and how things are funded. And so it's a little bit of a hard question, like you said, because every school district is so different in the way that they use their dollars and whatnot, and kind of the emphasis they put on some services versus others. And everyone's got the same goal is to support these kids. It just depends where it comes from. So
100% agree. Yeah, there are some school districts that have lots of speech language assistants and they can carry through the therapy. So they may be able to get more individual time in that district, whereas other districts may prioritize having more occupational therapists and speech therapists. And so they are being more broad based and in the classroom. So it really will depend. And I always urge the families that I work with to ask their administrator maybe what that looks like for September, or do they know yet? So they can start making a plan ahead as their child is kind of advancing through the grades.
What are some of the challenges that children with speech delays might face in a school setting, and how can teachers and parents work together to better accommodate these needs?
It's challenging for these little guys and girls, and, it's so challenging for them because if they have speech sound errors, they stand out, you know? Usually in kindergarten, their peers are forgiving, but as we get older, they're not so forgiving, and, "I don't understand you," or "I don't know what you're saying." Those are comments that the kids I work with hear, quite frequently, and so I would say, like, it's challenging for them because they wanna make connections, but if you can't share about your day and you don't have all the vocabulary or the speech sounds to communicate that fully, your ideas sometimes are lost, or maybe you don't understand the question that the teacher's asking you. So, I this is why my passion is AAC, and I love, augmenting and alternative communication because really, a teacher could do that in their classroom by having visuals. They could support them through a visual schedule, giving them choices, being able to interpret their ideas. A lot of these things can happen at the school level, and maybe even incorporating like a core board for communication. And this would be in collaboration with their speech language pathologist who works at school. But definitely a parent being able to communicate to the teacher, like, before they enter the classroom, how their child communicates, if they're non-speaking a non-speaking child, how do they communicate using their body or gestures or signs? So that goes into like another topic I know, but it's one of those things where if a teacher, the more information a teacher has and the school has, the more they can be prepared for your child when they come. And that might mean that they have a communication device. Well, the teacher, if they have some notice, they can maybe even learn how to communicate using the communication device before the child comes. So really the parent being open and communicating that with the school and finding out if there are, an EA in the classroom, a teacher, how they can share that information is very, very helpful.
Because it goes without saying that these speech delays or impediments might affect a child's self-esteem and almost surely will.
Yes. Yeah. So sometimes I do make referrals. On our team, we have psychologists who work with children too. So sometimes, depending on the child, if that speech sound or or language disorder is affecting them, then I often will make a referral like within us to a child psychologist so they can do some play therapy where there's maybe the impact is not really through spoken language. Maybe they're going to do some therapeutic play to get through the self-esteem and to build self-esteem and really build their confidence. And so for me, sometimes like working with psychology is like hand in hand as well.
100%. I've been to your practice and it's it's truly amazing there. The amount of interaction that these kids get to have, and they almost look forward to it because there's climbing structures and fidget toys that they've never had before, and games, and just different sensory activities for them to do. It's just really, you guys have done such an incredible job tapping into a child's mind and having them walk out with their head held higher. It's really, really an incredible practice.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Well, and that's like my whole goal for doing this is that I wanted to be able to build connections because I've worked in places where I felt like parents weren't connected to me. And I wanted them to know that we're here, we can help you navigate. And maybe I'm noticing that there's some feeding challenges with your child. Well, we have a dietitian that I can set you up with, maybe even a consultation. So it's hard because yeah, I have parents reach out to me all the time saying like, "What's the phone number to AHS?" Or, "Where do I go for this?" Or, "My child doesn't wanna go to the doctor's office, they're having a meltdown, who do I see?" So, there are so many different areas, and for us to be able to have most of them here, at least you have their initial contact, and if we can't support you here, we always make the best referral out to make, for that family's needs.
It's definitely a holistic approach or an all-encompassing approach, if you will, where everyone can kind of help a child out in different areas because often when they need one service, they'll probably need another, or they might need another at least. So yeah, it's nice as a parent too to just be able to go to one spot, not have to go from the south side to the north side to, so I think what you have is really unique and special for families to be able to experience for sure.
As a clinician too, there's nothing more frustrating when I'm trying to implement therapy and I know that the OT is probably doing things that overlap with me and I need to collaborate with them. And really, what's unique about us too is that we can share our notes and our charts and we can collaborate within the space. So if the child sees me last week and now they're coming to see OT this week, I can fill them in on like what happened, how it went, what we're working towards. So it really helps progress catapult forward because we're all on the same page. We're not trying to meeting with 4 different people.
Yeah, and it makes the most out of the child's time, the parents' time, everyone's time, really. So to go over the same things over and over again might not be necessary in this case. So the fact that you guys are able to come together, share, and everyone kind of takes off to what their niche is really super awesome. And I don't think there's a lot of places out there like that. So
Yeah, they're definitely growing. Yeah, for sure. I think the approach will catch up. I hope that like we have more spaces like this because yeah, I think the need is there for sure and parents really appreciate when we can connect and make their life a little easier, whether that be like scheduling, pre-scheduling, joint visits, whatever you need. When you're busy, you just really want someone to help you take care of it.
the sessions are just as beneficial to us as the parents as they are to the child, where you walk out thinking, now I have more skills and I have a better understanding of my child. So it ends up being for the whole family, I think. So for those who are listening at home, how would they find you? How would they get more information about Simon Says and the Alberta Therapy Co?
So our websites are connected. So if you land on one page, it'll bring you to the other. You'll be able to see the whole team. So really the best place to go would be www.albertatherapyco.com. That has all of our team and also a link to the speech pathology side of things. You can find us on Instagram through at Alberta Therapy Co. We're on TikTok, Pinterest. We're really across all platforms, so we can share resources. I am a game fanatic, so if I find something I really love using in therapy or we have fun with it at home, then I post it because I feel like parents are always looking for something to try or what is it appropriate for my child's age. I'm not really sure. I don't really want to buy a $30 game if it's a waste. So we're really trying to share the resources through like more community education and then also through like different resources that we'd like to use.
That's awesome, and I'm sure parents would be super happy to have their hands and eyes on those resources. So it has been awesome talking with you. I think that I know I learned a lot, and you have a very diverse practice and trade in what you're doing, and I think that you're moving mountains in these kids' lives. And so thank you for what you do for these kids, and I've just absolutely loved having you on this podcast.
Yay! Thank you so much. Yeah, I love chatting, and hopefully, yeah, one parent out there hears this and says, "Yes, I need to take that step forward," and I'm always open for a conversation or a consultation to help them talk through that process a little bit further too.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely have you back again. We've loved having you.
And that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks so much for joining us on Parenting Adventures. Remember, you're not alone in this journey, and we're always here to help. Parenting is like trying to fold a fitted sheet. It seems impossible at first, but with enough determination, you can make it work, kind of. If you're ready for the next step, visit tutorteach.ca/tutoring for personalized mindful tutoring and discover how we've helped over 3,000 students reach their goals. Until next time, keep calm and fold on.